My son's bride leaned in close during their wedding reception, her expensive perfume choking me. "Old man, listen closely," she whispered, her smile never leaving her face. "You're going to sign the papers for that house in Ansley Park as our wedding gift. If you don't, I will destroy your son. I'll leave him right after the honeymoon and make his life a living hell." I am Leon Hayes, 70 years old, and in that moment I knew I was looking at pure evil. I didn't say a word. I simply looked into her cold blue eyes and gave a slow, deliberate nod. A nod she took as surrender. Before I tell you what I did next, let me know in the comments where you're listening to this story from. And please hit like and subscribe if you believe that a family's foundation is built on truth, not lies. The MC called my name to give a speech. Brittany, my new daughter-in-law, gave me a triumphant wink. She thought she had won. I stood up, adjusting the tie my late wife Serena had given me. As I walked to the stage, 100 pairs of eyes on me, I could see Brittany beaming at the head table. That smile was about to be wiped off her face forever. But to understand the speech I was about to give you, need to understand the war that had been raging in secret for the last 6 months. It all started on a Sunday evening, the first time my son Andre brought Brittany home for dinner. This house isn't just an architectural structure, it's a diary. Every oak plank in the floor was chosen by me and Serena. Every nail was hammered with purpose. It's the place where we measured Andre's height on a doorframe and planted an oak tree in the backyard the day he was born. When Brittany walked in, her silence was worse than any criticism. She scanned the living room, her eyes lingering for a moment on the handcrafted mantelpiece I built. "Oh," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "It's so classic." She said the word classic the way an archaeologist would describe a ruin just before demolition. I knew then that she didn't see a home. She saw an asset. Throughout dinner, every word out of her mouth was a probe, a little hammer tapping against the walls to find a weakness. We were eating the roast chicken I'd made Serena's recipe, and Brittany looked toward the kitchen wall. "You know, Dad," she said, already calling me Dad like she had a right to, "is this a load-bearing wall? If you knocked it down, it would create such a wonderful open-plan living space." Andre, my own son, nodded like a fool. "That's a great idea, babe. You have such an amazing eye for what I wondered, for destruction." It felt like I was watching a demolition crew survey the project I'd spent my entire life building. They weren't seeing the memories embedded in the plaster. They were calculating square footage. The tension was a third person at the table. I kept my answers short, my face a mask of politeness. But inside I was comparing this cold, calculating woman to the memory of my Serena. Serena would have hated her. My wife could spot a crack in a foundation from a mile away, both literally and figuratively. She would have seen the rot behind Brittany's perfect smile in a single glance. I felt a deep, aching sadness. My son, who I had raised to be a good man, was blind to what was right in front of him. He saw a beautiful, charming woman. I saw a blueprint for disaster. The true conflict, the first open declaration of war, came with dessert. I had served a peach cobbler, another of Serena's recipes. Brittany took one bite and put her fork down. "This is delicious, Dad. It makes me think about the future, all the family gatherings we'll have." She smiled, then looked at Andre before turning her gaze back to me. "You know this house would sell for a fortune in this market," she said, her tone as casual as if she were discussing the weather. "With the gentrification in this neighborhood, you could easily clear 7 figures. We could use that to buy a proper family home in Buckhead. You could move in with us, of course. The guest suite is lovely." That was it. The friendly facade shattered. She wasn't just suggesting it, she was presenting a business plan, a hostile takeover of my life. I placed my fork down on my plate. The clink of metal against ceramic echoed in the sudden silence. Andre looked back and forth between us, a confused expression on his face. "Brittany," I said, and my voice was not loud, but it was as heavy as concrete. "Let me be perfectly clear. This house is not for sale." I spaced each word out, making sure there was no room for misinterpretation. This house is a legacy. It's an anchor. It is all that is left of Andre's mother in a physical form. For a split second, I saw her true face. The sweet smile vanished, replaced by a flash of cold reptilian fury. Her eyes narrowed. It was the look of a predator whose prey had just fought back. Then just as quickly the mask was back in place. She let out a little laugh. "Oh, Dad, of course. I was just brainstorming, just thinking out loud, but it was too late. The line had been drawn." Andre tried to smooth things over, stammering about how we were all just getting ahead of ourselves, but the damage was done. That night, as I washed the dishes in the quiet house, I knew this wasn't about my son falling in love with the wrong person. This was an invasion, and I would have to defend my home. After that disastrous dinner, Brittany never mentioned selling the house directly again. She was smart enough to know a frontal assault had failed. Instead, she began a siege, a war of attrition designed to erode my will through 1,000 seemingly innocent questions. The campaign began during the most ordinary moments. I'd be in the garden pulling weeds, and she would bring out a glass of iced tea. "Dad, you must have worked so hard to pay this beautiful house off," she'd say, her voice full of admiration. "Being mortgage-free in this day and age is the dream." It sounded like a compliment, but I knew it was a reconnaissance mission. I'd just grunt in response. My wife Serena was good with money. She hated debt. A few days later, while we were watching a financial news show, she'd sigh and say, "The market is so volatile. I hope your retirement funds are in something stable." I told her I didn't play games with risky investments. Each of my answers was a closed door, giving her no new information. But I could see the wheels turning in her head as she assembled a mosaic of my financial life. My son Andre was completely oblivious. He just saw a caring future daughter-in-law concerned about his father's well-being. He even told me once, "Brittany really worries about you, Dad. She wants to make sure you're set for a comfortable retirement." I just nodded. I knew exactly whose comfort she was worried about. The real attack came on a Saturday afternoon. Brittany announced she was bringing a friend over, someone she said was dying to meet me. The friend turned out to be a slick white guy named Chad. He had a smile that was too white, a suit that was too shiny, and a handshake that felt like he was assessing my bone density. "A pleasure to meet you, Mr. Hayes," he said, but his eyes weren't on me. They were scanning the joinery on my ceiling beams, the quality of the hardwood floors, the dimensions of the window frames. I've been a builder my entire life. I know the look of a man taking measurements when I see one. She had brought a Trojan horse into my home. We sat in the living room, and Chad oozed compliments that all sounded like they came from a sales brochure. "This place has incredible bones," he said. "The craftsmanship is just something you don't see anymore. It adds a unique selling proposition." He talked about the market, how the neighborhood was the hottest in Atlanta, how young tech millionaires were desperate for properties, with character that they could gut and renovate. Andre listened, his eyes wide with fascination. Brittany just smiled, sipping her tea, letting her friend do the dirty work. Then Chad leaned forward, creating a sense of intimacy that felt completely false. "I'm not trying to be forward, Mr. Hayes," he began, which is always what people say right before they are about to be forward. "But a smaller house on the next block just sold for $950,000. And it doesn't have a yard like this." Andre gasped. "Seriously?" Brittany feigned surprise. "Wow, that's incredible." Chad held up his hand like a priest giving a blessing. "And that was a private sale. If you listed this property with me with a little staging, new paint, modern furniture, we could easily start the bidding at $1.2 million, maybe more." $1.2 million. The number hung in the air thick and heavy. I saw it reflected in Brittany's eyes. For a fraction of a second, the mask of polite interest dropped, and I saw the undiluted gleam of a predator that has just spotted a wounded animal. It was a look of pure, ravenous greed. Andre looked like he had just been told he'd won the lottery. Only I remained silent, my face unreadable. I had spent less than 1/10 of that to build this entire house with my own 2 hands. To me, its value wasn't in dollars, but in decades of sweat and love. To them, it was a pile of cash waiting to be claimed. Chad must have sensed my coldness. "Of course," he added quickly, "that's just if you were ever considering downsizing." Brittany jumped in. "We were just curious, Chad. Dad is very happy here." She patted my arm, a gesture that felt possessive and condescending. The rest of the visit was a blur of meaningless small talk. When I walked them to the door, Chad pressed his business card into my hand. "Just in case you ever change your mind, Mr. Hayes." I took the card without looking at it. The moment I closed the door behind them, I walked straight to the fireplace where a small fire was burning against the afternoon chill. They didn't come for a visit. They came to put a price tag on my life's work. I dropped the card into the flames and watched it curl into black ash. The war had just escalated. When the direct assault on my wallet failed, Brittany turned to a more insidious weapon, my own son. She began a quiet, venomous campaign to poison Andre against me. I started to notice the change in small ways at first. Andre's daily phone calls became less frequent. When he did call, his voice was strained, distant. He stopped asking about my woodworking projects or the neighbors. Instead, our conversation started to feel like business meetings. He began using words that didn't belong in his mouth, words that tasted like they were manufactured in a corporate boardroom. He'd talk about our home not as a home, but as a trapped legacy asset. He spoke of the need to optimize our family's financial portfolio. That was Brittany's language, cold, sterile, and soulless. It was like hearing a stranger speak through my son's mouth. I remember one afternoon he came over and he had that look on his face he gets when Brittany has wound him up like a toy soldier and sent him on a mission. We were sitting on the back porch, the same porch where I taught him how to tie his shoes. "Dad," he started, not looking at me. "Have you ever thought that maybe holding on to this house isn't about preserving memories, but about being afraid of the future?" I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. "What future are you talking about, son?" I asked. "The future," and he said, his voice rising with a frustration that felt rehearsed. "Brittany and I are trying to build something. She has incredible ideas for her lifestyle brand, but we need capital. This house, it's holding us back. It's holding you back." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This house, the very foundation I had given him, was now being called an anchor holding him down. This wasn't my son talking. This was his puppeteer. The breaking point came a week later. Andre came over alone, which was rare these days. He had a folder in his hand and a determined look on his face. He sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd done his homework as a boy, and opened the folder. It was filled with printouts of real estate listings in Buckhead. My heart sank. This was it. This was the big push. "Dad," he said, his voice calm and practiced, "I need you to listen with an open mind. Brittany and I have put together a financial plan, a strategy for our future. And it all starts with leveraging the equity in this property." He used those exact words. Leveraging the equity. I looked at my son, the boy I taught how to throw a baseball and how to treat people with respect. And all I saw was a mouthpiece for Brittany's greed. "This property," I said slowly, "has a name. It's called our home." He sighed, a sound of deep frustration, as if I were a difficult child. "I know it's emotional for you, Dad, but you have to be logical. $1.2 million. That's not just a house, it's a lifetime of security for all of us. You could have a beautiful condo downtown, no yard to mow, no roof to fix. You could travel. We could start our family without being buried in debt. It's the smart move." I tried to reach him to find the son I knew was buried under all this corporate jargon. "Andre, do you remember when we built the tree house in the backyard? You were 10. You hammered your thumb and your mother spent an hour holding a bag of frozen peas on it. Do you remember that?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Yeah, I remember." "What's that got to do with anything?" "It has everything to do with everything," I said, my voice rising. "This house isn't made of money, son. It's made of memories. It's made of us." That's when he snapped. All the practiced calmness disappeared, replaced by raw, unfiltered anger. "Memories don't pay the bills," he shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "Dad, you're being selfish. You only think about your memories, not my future. You want me to be stuck here in the past just like you are." The words hit me harder than any physical blow ever could. Selfish. After everything Serena and I had sacrificed for him, after a lifetime of putting him first, he called me selfish. In the ringing silence that followed his shout, my mind flashed back. I saw Serena years ago sitting on the porch of this half-built house. She was sketching in a notepad, designing the garden. She looked up at me, her eyes full of a fierce, beautiful pride, and said, "Leon, this house isn't just wood and nails, it's a statement. It's proof that we as black people can build things that last. It's our anchor, so Andre and his children will always know where they come from." That memory, that promise, was the steel in my spine. I looked at my son, his face red with anger, and my own anger faded, replaced by a profound sadness. "This house is your foundation. Andre," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Whether you see it or not, I am not stuck in the past. I am protecting your future from a woman who only sees you as a bank account." That was a mistake. I had brought her into it directly. "Don't you dare blame Brittany," he roared, standing up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. "She is the only one who is actually thinking about my life, my success. Maybe you should try listening to her instead of living inside a museum." He grabbed his folder of listings and stormed towards the door. "I can't talk to you when you're like this," he spat. And then he was gone. The front door slammed shut, and the sound echoed through every room. It felt like a crack running right through the foundation of our family. For the first time, I felt truly alone in my own home. Brittany wasn't just trying to take my house. She was taking my son. And she was winning. As my son's angry words echoed in the kitchen, the present moment seemed to dissolve around me. His voice, twisted with Brittany's ambition, became a dull roar in the background. My mind retreated, pulling me back through the years to a quiet afternoon 30 years ago. The house was just a skeleton, then a frame of fresh-cut pine and possibility. I was on a ladder securing a roof beam, and Serena was sitting on what would one day be our back porch. The air smelled of sawdust and Georgia clay. She wasn't looking at me. Her gaze was fixed on a patch of bare dirt, a notepad resting on her knees. She was sketching, her pencil moving with a quiet intensity. I climbed down and walked over to her, wiping the sweat from my brow. "What masterpiece are you designing now?" I asked, looking over her shoulder. It wasn't a house plan. It was a garden. Intricate pathways, flower beds, and right in the center a small circle she had labeled oak tree. She looked up at me, and the afternoon sun caught the light in her eyes. There was a fire in them, a look of fierce determination I had come to know as the bedrock of our life together. "This is more than a garden, Leon," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. "And this is more than a house." She tapped the notepad with her pencil. "This is a statement." She continued, her gaze sweeping over the wooden frame of our future home. "It's proof. Proof that we as Black folks can build things that last. Not rent them, not live in them until someone else decides we have to move. Own them. Build them from the ground up with our own two hands. This house, this land, it's our anchor, Leon. So that Andre and his children and their children will always have a place to stand. A place to know without a shadow of a doubt exactly where they come from." She looked at me then, and her expression was so full of love and conviction it took my breath away. "Promise me," she whispered. "Promise me we will always protect this anchor." Her voice from 3 decades ago was clearer and more powerful in my mind than my own son's shouting just a few feet away. His words were temporary, fueled by a shallow greed he didn't even understand. But Serena's words were the foundation. They were the concrete and steel of my resolve. The fight wasn't just about wood and nails anymore. It was about a promise. It was about protecting the very soul of our family from being sold for a condo in Buckhead. As the memory faded and my son's angry face came back into focus, my sadness was replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I knew what I had to do. Brittany's patience, it turned out, had a very short shelf life. After the explosive argument with Andre, a tense, heavy silence fell between us for nearly 2 weeks. He didn't call. I didn't call. The pride of an old man and the stubbornness of a manipulated son had created a chasm between us. I retreated to my sanctuary, my woodworking shop in the basement. It's the one place in the house that is entirely mine, a place where the scent of cedar and machine oil can usually calm my mind. I was working on restoring an old rocking chair, trying to sand away the imperfections, trying to lose myself in the steady, repetitive motion. It was a Thursday evening and the sun was setting. My workshop has a small ground-level window that looks out onto the backyard right underneath the deck. I was focused on my work, the hum of the overhead light, the only sound, when I heard the sliding glass door to the deck screech open above me. Then I heard her voice, Brittany's voice. Normally I would have ignored it, but something in her tone made me freeze my hand, hovering over the wood. It wasn't the sweet, syrupy voice she used for me and Andre. This voice was different. It was sharp, brittle, and laced with a contempt so raw it was startling. It was the voice of a completely different person. I switched off my sanding machine and listened in the sudden silence. "No, I don't have it yet." "What do you think I've been doing?" She snarled into her phone. There was a pause. "Look, don't you dare threaten me. I'm handling it." She started pacing her heels, clicking angrily on the deck boards right above my head. "Because the old man is as stubborn as a mule." That's why. He's clinging to that pile of bricks like it's made of solid gold. Her voice rose, becoming a shrill, ugly thing. I can't wait any longer. Doesn't he understand that we need the money? Now. Dad's creditors are closing in. If I don't get the down payment for that house by the end of the month, everything falls apart. Do you hear me? Everything. I stood there in the dim light of my workshop, the sanding block still in my hand, completely frozen. Every word she spoke was a physical blow, but two words hit me like a lightning strike, knocking the air from my lungs. Dad's creditors. The story she had so carefully crafted for us was about her father, a retired dentist, living a carefree life in some golf community in Florida. A man without a financial worry in the world. A man who supposedly adored his daughter and approved of her wonderful fiancée. A lie. It was all a meticulously constructed lie. In that single moment, all the grief, the confusion, and the feeling of betrayal I had been wrestling with for months simply vanished. It evaporated. And in its place, something else took root. A feeling of cold, absolute clarity. It was the feeling a builder gets when he looks at a beautiful building and finally sees the single fatal crack running through its foundation. She wasn't just a gold digger. She was desperate. She was running from something, and she was using my son as her escape plan, my family's legacy as her getaway car. I gently placed the sanding block on my workbench. I made no sound. I stood in the darkness listening as her footsteps retreated back into the house. The game had just changed. This was no longer a family dispute. This was a war for survival. And I was done being on the defensive. It was time to start building my counterattack. The moment Brittany's footsteps faded back into the house, I walked over to the old rotary phone I kept on my workbench. My hands were steady. My heart wasn't pounding. The fury and the hurt had cooled and hardened into something else purpose. There was only one person I could call. I dialed the number from memory. It rang twice before a deep, familiar voice answered. Reggie Carter speaking. Reggie and I went back 50 years. We'd laid bricks together in our youth before he went to law school, and I started my own construction business. He was the sharpest man I knew and the only one I trusted completely. Reggie, it's Leon, I said. My voice was even calm. I spoke like I was reporting a structural issue on a job site. I have a problem I need your counsel on. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I laid out the facts concisely, point by point. I told him about Andre's new fiancée, Brittany. I described her initial suggestions to sell the house, the visit from the real estate agent, and the $1.2 million figure. I detailed the way she had turned my own son against me, filling his head with talk of trapped assets. And then I told him about the phone call I had just overheard. I repeated her words exactly as I'd heard them. She said Dad's creditors are closing in. I paused. Reggie, the story she told us is that her father is a retired dentist in Florida with no financial worries. I didn't need to add anything else. I presented the facts, the discrepancy, the flaw in the blueprint. Reggie was silent on the other end of the line for a long moment. He wasn't formulating sympathy. He was analyzing the problem. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and serious. He didn't offer condolences. He offered a strategy. Okay, Leon, he said, his tone all business. First thing, you do not confront her. Do you understand me? Absolutely no confrontation. I told him I understood. Good, he continued. Because the moment you accuse her, you lose your advantage. She will twist it. She will tell Andre you're confused, that you misheard. She'll paint you as the angry, jealous old man trying to sabotage your son's happiness. She will use your love for your son against you and drive the wedge between you even deeper. Right now, her greatest weapon is making you look unreasonable. I listened, absorbing every word. He was right. A direct emotional outburst would be playing right into her hands. So what do I do? I asked. Nothing, Reggie said, and I could almost hear the sharp, tactical smile in his voice. You do nothing. You let her think she's winning. You let her believe you're a defeated old man. You let her get comfortable, let her get arrogant, and while she's planning her victory parade, we dig. We find out who her father really is. We find out what these debts are. We find every crack in the rotten foundation she has built her life on. We don't just want to expose her, Leon. We want to dismantle her. The way he said it sent a chill down my spine, but it was a comforting chill. I wasn't alone in this fight anymore. I have a man, Reggie said, his voice dropping lower. A private investigator. He's discreet and he's the best. His name is Marcus Thorne. I'm going to send you his number right now. Call him tomorrow. Tell him I sent you. And Leon, Don't say another word about this to Andre or that woman. Not one word. I agreed. As I hung up the phone, I looked at my hands. They were the hands of a builder, and I was about to start the demolition process. While I waited for Marcus Thorne, the private investigator, to begin his official work, I started my own quiet investigation. I'm an old man, but I'm not a fool. I know my way around a computer. Serena always said that a man who can read a blueprint can learn to read anything, so I sat down at my old desktop computer in the study, the one Andre had set up for me years ago, and I started to search for Brittany Larson. The first few hours were a lesson in frustration. Everything I found was perfectly curated, a digital masterpiece of a life that was just aspirational enough to be believable. Her public Instagram was a gallery of professionally lit photos: Brittany smiling at a farmer's market, Brittany volunteering at an animal shelter, Brittany and Andre looking lovingly into each other's eyes under a canopy of autumn leaves. Her lifestyle blog was full of articles with titles like "Finding Luxury in the Little Things" and "How to Decorate on a Budget." It was all a carefully constructed fiction, a fortress of fake modesty designed to hide whatever was behind its walls. There were no cracks, no inconsistencies. It was too perfect, and that I knew was the most suspicious thing of all. I was about to give up for the night, my eyes tired from staring at the screen, when a memory surfaced. It was a faint echo from a few months back, a family barbecue. Brittany had had a little too much white wine. Her usual guard was down, and she became loud and boastful. She was telling a story about her college days, and I remembered her laughing and slurring her words, saying something like, "Back at UGA Tiff, and her girls were absolutely wild." At the time, I assumed Tiff was a friend. But now, in the quiet of my study, the name echoed differently. What if Tiff wasn't a friend? What if it was a nickname, Tiffany? It was a long shot, a gut feeling based on a drunken slip of the tongue. But a builder trusts his gut. I opened the search engine again. This time I didn't type Brittany Larson. I typed Tiffany Larson UGA. And there it was. The first result was a link to an old public Instagram account. The username was Tiff Larson UGA Life. The last post was from 6 years ago. My heart started to beat a little faster. I clicked the link. It was like opening a door to a secret room. The person in these photos was Brittany, there was no doubt about it. But the life she was living was one I didn't recognize at all. This wasn't the girl who wrote blog posts about budget decorating. This was someone else entirely. I spent the next 2 hours scrolling through a life of obscene, unapologetic wealth. It wasn't the life of a dentist's middle-class daughter. It was the life of an heiress. There were pictures of her on the deck of a yacht in the Mediterranean, a bottle of champagne in her hand. There were photos of her stepping off a private jet in what looked like Dubai. There were pictures of her at lavish parties wearing designer dresses and holding Birkin bags that cost more than my first car. This wasn't a life of finding luxury in the little things. This was a life of flaunting it. And in dozens of these photos there was a man. He was older, in his late 50s, overweight, with a slick, greasy smile that reminded me of a used car salesman. He was always by her side. In one photo, she was kissing his cheek, her arm draped around his thick neck. The caption was a string of emojis followed by the words, "Thanks, Dad, for everything, best birthday ever." This had to be him, the father, the man whose creditors were closing in. He didn't look like a retired dentist. He looked like a man who had made a lot of money and was terrified of losing it. I kept scrolling, my mind racing. This was the proof. This was the lie. But it still didn't connect all the dots. Why the elaborate deception? Why target my family? I zoomed in on one of the pictures from the yacht. Brittany and the man were standing at the helm laughing. Behind them on the cabin wall, the name of the boat was painted in gold script. My eyes struggled to read it. The Larson's Folly. A strange name for a boat. Then I looked closer at the man. He was wearing a white polo shirt. On the chest there was a small embroidered logo. It was a stylized L and an R. Underneath there was a name. Oh, idiot. My blood went cold. I leaned in so close my nose almost touched the screen. The name was Larson Real Estate. And then it hit me, like a ton of bricks. Frank Larson. A cold, bitter memory from 15 years ago, a memory I had tried to bury, came rushing back with the force of a tidal wave. Frank Larson. The real estate developer who had partnered with me on a small housing project. The man who had disappeared with our investment money, leaving me and Serena on the brink of bankruptcy. The man whose betrayal had almost cost us everything. This wasn't just a random gold digger. This was the daughter of the man who had tried to ruin my life. This wasn't about building a future. This was about settling an old score. The name on the screen, Larson Real Estate, wasn't just a name. It was a ghost. It threw me back 15 years to a time of hope and crushing betrayal. Frank Larson. He had been a charismatic, fast-talking developer with a wide smile and a firm handshake. He came into our community a black man who had supposedly made it big, and he sold us a dream. He spoke at our church, sponsored a local Little League team, and talked about building something for ourselves, a new retail development that would be owned and operated by black businesses. He used all the right words: empowerment, community, legacy. He earned our trust. Serena was cautious at first, but his charm and his detailed plans eventually won her over too. We, along with a half-dozen other small business owners, pooled our savings and invested with him. It was everything we had, a nest egg we had painstakingly built over 2 decades. Frank Larson took that nest egg and he vanished. One day his office was empty. His phone was disconnected. The development project, we learned, was a fantasy built on forged permits and lies. He had taken every last dollar. The betrayal nearly broke us. We were leveraged to the hilt, on the verge of losing not just our business, but the very land this house was built on. It was Serena's fierce intelligence, her refusal to be a victim, that saved us. She spent weeks digging, calling, uncovering a paper trail that led to a hidden account. We got most of our money back, but the scars never faded. The memory of that humiliation. That violation was a ghost I thought we had buried long ago. Now, looking at the face of his daughter on my computer screen, I knew that the ghost had never left. It had simply been waiting. I pushed away from the desk, my legs unsteady. My mind was a whirlwind, but one thought cut through the chaos. Serena kept everything. My wife was the family archivist. She believed that a piece of paper, a signed contract, a canceled check was more powerful than any weapon. "People can lie, Leon," she used to say, "but the paperwork never does." I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that the answers I needed were not on the internet. They were upstairs. I pulled down the rickety folding ladder to the attic. The air that rushed down was thick and warm, smelling of ancient dust and dry paper, the scent of dormant memories. I climbed into the darkness, the single bare bulb casting long dancing shadows. The attic was our time capsule, a silent museum of our life together. In one corner was Andre's old crib. In another, boxes of Serena's books she could never bear to part with. It was the ghost of our past, and I was here to ask it for help. I moved past stacks of old furniture draped in white sheets, my footsteps stirring up clouds of dust that swirled in the dim light. I was looking for Serena's domain, a meticulously organized corner where she kept dozens of file boxes, each one neatly labeled in her elegant handwriting. Taxes 1985. Appliance warranties. Andre, school records. Well, she was a librarian of our life. My heart pounded as I ran my fingers along the spines of the boxes, and then I saw it. A single heavy-duty file box, set apart from the others. The label on it was simple, written in thick black marker, not Serena's usual graceful script. It was as if she had written it in a hurry with a sense of urgency. The label said one word: Larson. It was a coffin full of answers. I blew a layer of dust off the lid and pried it open. The box was heavy, not just with the weight of paper, but with the weight of the past. I carried it over to the single bare bulb, the only island of light in the dusty darkness of the attic, and lifted the lid. Inside it was exactly as I expected. Serena's meticulous damning evidence. There were copies of the fraudulent contracts Frank Larson had us sign. There were bank statements showing the wire transfers we made to his shell corporation. There were sworn affidavits from other victims he had conned. Serena had built a legal cage of paper around that man, a case so airtight that when she finally presented it to him through her lawyer, he had no choice but to return the money to avoid a federal prison sentence. It was a monument to her brilliance and her tenacity. But as I sifted through these painful reminders of our near ruin, my fingers brushed against something that didn't feel like a legal document. It was a simple manila envelope, yellowed with age, sealed with a strip of old tape. And on the front, in Serena's beautiful, elegant handwriting, were 5 words that made my heart stop. Leon, only open when you must. I sat there on the dusty floor of the attic, holding the envelope in my hands. It felt warm, as if she had just handed it to me. For a moment I hesitated. It felt like a violation, a conversation I was about to have with my wife that she couldn't answer. "What is it, Serena?" I whispered into the quiet, dusty air. "What did you know?" For 15 years, this envelope had been sitting here, a silent guardian, a final secret she had kept. I had thought we had no secrets, but I was wrong. She had seen a threat on the horizon that I had missed, and she had prepared for it. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal. My hands, which had built an entire house without a tremor, were shaking as I pulled out the contents. It wasn't a letter. It was a small stack of legal documents held together by a paper clip. On top was a single sheet of notepaper with her handwriting on it. My eyes scanned the words, and the air left my lungs in a single silent gasp. The note was short, direct, and devastatingly brilliant. "My dearest Leon," it began. "After what Frank Larson did to us, I learned we cannot trust in goodwill alone. We must trust in structures. That is why 10 years ago I secretly established the Hayes Family Irrevocable Trust. I legally transferred our home and all major assets into it. Our son Andre is the sole beneficiary. You, my love, are the trustee. What this means, Leon, is that you do not legally own this house anymore. You are its protector, its guardian. You cannot sell it. You cannot leverage it. It cannot be taken from you or from our son by any creditor or by any predator. Use this to protect our boy. Always, your Serena." I read the note 3 times, the words blurring through the tears that were now streaming down my face. The entire foundation of Brittany's scheme, her entire elaborate plan of seduction and manipulation, was built on one simple assumption that I owned my house. But I didn't. Serena from beyond the grave had foreseen a future threat. She had laid a landmine right in the middle of her enemy's path, a legal bomb that was about to detonate their entire world. My wife wasn't just a smart woman, she was a master strategist, and she had just handed me the winning move. After discovering Serena's final brilliant move, I sat in the attic for a long time holding the documents that felt like a weapon forged by love. The path forward was now crystal clear. The time for defense was over. It was time to set a trap. The next morning, I picked up the phone to call Andre. Before I dialed, I took a few deep breaths. I was an actor now, and this was the most important performance of my life. I had to make my voice sound like the scrape of old tired bones. I had to sound defeated. When Andre answered, his voice was cautious, wary. "Dad," he said. I let out a long, weary sigh, making sure he could hear the rattle of exhaustion in my breath. "Andre, son," I began, my voice quiet and raspy. "I'm tired. I'm just so tired of fighting." I paused, letting the silence hang between us. "I've been thinking about what you said, about the future, about being stuck in the past." I forced a little crack into my voice as if I were on the verge of tears. "Maybe you're right. Maybe an old man's memories aren't as important as his son's future. A house is just a house, I suppose." I could hear the surprise in his silence. "Dad, are you okay?" he asked, his tone softening with concern. This was the Andre I knew, the caring son buried beneath Brittany's influence. "I will be," I said weakly. I don't want this between us anymore. You and Brittany, you should be happy. We can talk about the house. After the wedding. Whatever you two decide, I'll support it." It was the most difficult lie I had ever told, each word a betrayal of the promise I had made to Serena. But it was a necessary betrayal. It was the bait. And just as I hoped, the fish took it. I heard a muffled sound and then Andre's voice, distant, saying, "Here, you talk to him." Suddenly Brittany's voice was on the line, sharp and sickeningly sweet. "Oh, Dad, Leon, I'm so glad to hear you say that," she cooed, the triumph barely concealed in her tone. "We were so worried about you. I told Andre you just needed some time to see the logic of it all. We're so excited to finally move forward together as a family." I could practically hear her smug smile through the phone. She thought she had broken me. She thought she had won. "Yes," I said, my voice just a whisper. "As a family." In the weeks that followed, I played the part of the docile, defeated old man to perfection. I became a ghost in my own home. Andre and Brittany would come over for dinner and they would spread blueprints out on the very kitchen table where I had once confronted her. They would talk excitedly about knocking down walls, about putting in a marble island, about turning my workshop into a wine cellar. They discussed the future of my house as if I wasn't even there. I would just sit in my armchair, nodding and smiling faintly, offering no opinions. "Whatever you kids think is best," I'd murmur. Brittany would pat my hand and say things like, "See, Andre, he's finally coming around." They mistook my silence for submission. They had no idea that my silence was a coiled snake waiting. While they were picking out paint colors, I was having quiet late-night phone calls with Reggie and Marcus Thorne. While they were getting quotes from contractors, I was receiving detailed reports about Frank Larson's web of debt and his desperate financial situation. They were designing a new kitchen. I was designing their downfall. The closer the wedding day got, the more arrogant Brittany became and the more relieved Andre seemed. He thought the war was over. He had no idea the final battle was just about to begin. When I took the microphone, a hush fell over the room. I tapped it once, a familiar sound from countless church meetings and community events. I looked out at the sea of faces, all smiling, all expectant. My eyes found my son Andre. He was looking at me with such pride, such love. For a moment my resolve wavered, but then I saw Brittany sitting next to him, her smile a mask of triumphant condescension. And I remembered the promise I made to Serena. My resolve hardened like steel. I began my voice warm and steady, the voice of a proud father. "Good evening, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Leon Hayes, and I am the proudest father in the world tonight." I smiled directly at Andre, and it was a genuine smile. "Andre, seeing you here tonight, so full of joy and hope, is the greatest gift a father could ever ask for. I have watched you grow from a little boy who was afraid of the dark into a fine, strong, and compassionate man. Your mother would be bursting with pride." I paused, letting that thought settle in the room. I then turned my smile to Brittany. It was harder, but I was an actor now. "And Brittany," I said, my voice full of practiced warmth, "welcome to the family. You have brought a new energy into our lives. You've made my son incredibly happy, and for that I am truly grateful. A father hopes for his son to find a partner who will be his equal, his confidant, and his greatest champion. And we all hope that for you both, tonight." I raised my glass. "So please join me in a toast. To new beginnings, to a future filled with love, laughter, and a lifetime of happiness. To Andre and Brittany." The room echoed with the clinking of glasses and applause. Brittany was beaming, basking in the moment. She thought this was it, the harmless ramblings of an old man. She had no idea I was just setting the stage. I held up my hand to quiet the applause. "Thank you," I said, my smile fading just a little. "If you'll indulge an old builder for one more moment. As I look at these two young people about to start their life together, I can't help but think about what it takes to build something that lasts." My voice started to change. The warmth was still there, but now it was underpinned by something else, something solid, something unyielding. You see, a marriage is a lot like a house. You can have the most beautiful design, the most expensive finishes, the fanciest decorations. But if the foundation isn't solid, if it's built on unstable ground or with faulty materials, the whole structure will eventually come crashing down. The room was silent now, a different kind of silence. A curious, attentive silence. They could sense the shift. You need a foundation that is strong, deep, and true. A foundation built on trust. A foundation built on respect. I paused, and then I turned my head slowly and looked directly for the first time that night straight into Brittany's eyes. And most importantly, a foundation built on honesty. I held her gaze, letting the word honesty hang in the air between us. I saw a flicker of panic in her eyes, but she held her composure, her painted-on smile still in place. "For instance," I continued, my voice now calm and conversational, as if I were telling a simple story, "Brittany has shown a remarkable concern for our family's future, a deep, deep interest in our financial well-being. In fact, she has been so forward-thinking that she even suggested I sell my home, the home where I raised my son and where my wife passed away, so that she and Andre could have a better start in life." A nervous murmur rippled through the room. It was no longer a celebratory toast. It was something else. I saw my sister exchange a worried glance with her husband. Andre looked completely bewildered, his head turning from me to Brittany. He knew it was true, but he couldn't understand why I was bringing it up now in this way. Brittany's smile tightened at the edges. She gave a little dismissive shake of her head as if to say, "Oh, that silly old man." But I wasn't finished. I was just laying the groundwork. Some might see that as simple youthful ambition. I said, my eyes still locked on hers. And I tried to see it that way too. But her family's particular interest in our property, well, it's not exactly new. I let that sentence sink in. The air in the room grew thick with tension. In fact, I said, raising my voice slightly so everyone could hear, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge a special guest here with us tonight, an old business associate of mine, Mr. Peterson. Would you mind standing up for a moment? All heads turned. In a corner of the room, a distinguished-looking older man, my friend Reggie's former law partner, slowly rose to his feet. He gave a solemn nod. Brittany was no longer smiling. Her face was a blank canvas of confusion and dawning horror. She didn't know who this man was, but she knew he was a threat. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson," I said. Now, Mr. Peterson has a better memory than I do for old business dealings, and he might remember a very ambitious real estate developer we both had the misfortune of knowing about 15 years ago. A man with big dreams and very loose ethics. A man who was very, very interested in the assets of my family. I let the silence stretch, drawing out her agony. A man, I said, my voice dropping clear and cold as ice, named Frank Larson. I watched her face as I said his name. It was the most satisfying moment of my life. The color didn't just drain from her cheeks, it was violently ripped away. Her face wasn't pale, it was the flat, dead gray of cold ash. The mask didn't just slip, it shattered into a million pieces, revealing the terrified, cornered fraud underneath. Andre looked at her, then at me, his mouth hanging open. Frank Larson. He whispered the name, meaning nothing to him. But it meant everything to her. And I was about to explain to everyone in the room exactly what it meant for all of us. Yes, Frank Larson, I repeated, letting his name hang in the air like a foul odor. For those of you who don't know, Mr. Larson and I had a business dealing many years ago. He taught me and my late wife Serena a very valuable, very painful lesson about trust and about the lengths some people will go to for money. He tried to take everything from us. I looked at my son. Andre, the reason you grew up in that house, the reason you had a foundation to build your life on, is because your mother was smarter and stronger than men like Frank Larson. He almost destroyed us, but he failed. And in failing, he gave us a gift. He taught us to be prepared. He taught us that the best defense is not a high wall, but a flawless legal structure. I reached into the inner pocket of my suit jacket. My hand was perfectly steady. The entire room was silent, holding its breath. Brittany was trembling, her eyes wide with a terror that was beautiful to behold. But here's the best part of the story, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, forcing everyone to lean in. You see, Frank Larson taught my wife Serena a lesson she never forgot. A lesson about protecting her family from predators. And my wife was a brilliant student. I pulled out the yellowed envelope and the documents from the attic. I held them up for everyone to see. Shortly after our business with Mr. Larson concluded, Serena did something secret and something brilliant. She established the Hayes Family Irrevocable Trust. I let the legal term settle over the room. I could see the confusion on Andre's face, but the dawning catastrophic understanding on Brittany's. What this means, I explained, looking directly at my son, but speaking for Brittany's benefit, is that my wife legally transferred our home and all our major assets into a trust. I am merely the trustee, the guardian. Andre is the sole beneficiary, but the terms are very clear. The assets in that trust, including the house, cannot be sold, leveraged, or touched in any way until he is 40 years old. I unfolded the note from Serena, the paper crinkling softly in the silent room. I then turned my full attention, my entire being, to the gray-faced woman sitting at the head table. So, Brittany, I said, my voice devoid of all emotion, cold and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. Your entire elaborate plan, your web of lies, your manipulation of my son, your cruel threats. It was all for nothing. It was all built on a fantasy. You have spent the last 6 months trying to rob a bank that has been empty for over a decade. The silence that followed my final words was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, the kind that feels like a physical weight. For a long moment, nobody moved, nobody breathed. Then it broke. Not with a bang, but with 100 whispered conversations erupting all at once. The entire room dissolved into a chaotic murmur of shock and disbelief. But I didn't hear any of it. My focus was entirely on my son. Andre slowly turned his head to look at Brittany. The confusion and hurt on his face were gone, replaced by something I had never seen him direct at anyone before, pure, unadulterated disgust. It was the look of a man who had just woken up from a beautiful dream to find he had been sleeping with a venomous snake. He wasn't looking at his bride, the love of his life. He was looking at a complete stranger, a con artist, and he finally truly saw her for the first time. Brittany did not cry. She did not scream or protest, her face a mask of gray ash contorted into a snarl of pure hatred. She stood up so abruptly her chair screeched backwards and nearly tipped over. With a violent, convulsive movement, she ripped the bridal bouquet from the table and hurled it to the floor. The white roses scattered across the polished wood like shattered bones. She locked eyes with me one last time, and in that look there was no remorse, no shame. There was only the promise of a bitter, unending hatred. Then she turned her $10,000 wedding dress swishing around her and she walked. She didn't run. She walked head held high right through the stunned crowd, out the grand ballroom doors, and out of our lives forever. Later that night, the guests were long gone. The wreckage of the reception cleared away. Andre and I sat in the living room of my house, of our house. The silence had returned, but this time it wasn't a weapon or a wall. It was a quiet space for healing to begin. We didn't speak. There were no words for the chasm that had opened up between us, or for the long road back we would have to travel. Outside, a streetlight cast a soft glow through the window, illuminating a portrait of Serena on the wall. In the dim light, she looked like she was smiling, a look of quiet, knowing pride on her face. The foundation had been tested by a hurricane. The storm had passed, and the house was still standing. This whole ordeal taught me a powerful lesson. A family's true foundation isn't built with wood or stone, but with honesty. A lie, no matter how beautifully it's decorated, will always rot the structure from the inside out. I learned that real strength isn't about raising your voice, but about being patient, observing and understanding the full blueprint before you make a single move. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one holding the most powerful truths. Protecting your legacy means being willing to tear down a flawed structure to save the solid ground it stands on. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision to protect the people you love?